Emmerich didn't go with depleted uranium for Sahelanthropus' armor because of its strength.
He had nukes in mind.
Exactly. It's meant to use its body as the fuel component for a nuclear weapon. Sahelanthropus uses built-in uranium enrichment archaea to melt its own body and extract uranium-235 from the depleted uranium in its armor. Those archaea perform the enrichment in an extremely short time. The concentration jumps by a factor of several hundred, from 0.2% to over 90%, the end result being highly enriched weapons-grade uranium. Sahelanthropus' body itself becomes a nuclear bomb. Emmerich says if it were to self-destruct, the nuclear yield would be somewhere in the region of 15 kilotons. Since you need about 50 kilograms of highly enriched uranium to trigger a nuclear reaction, that would mean Sahelanthropus contains something like 23 tons of depleted uranium.
That's not very much.
No, it isn't. That's about what you'd expect to find in a main battle tank's armor. The point is, it can be transported anywhere, even use its conventional weaponry on the battlefield, and the international community will never suspect a thing. I just received word from the R&D team and the transport team out of Afghanistan. They finished installing Sahelanthropus on the base. It's ours now.
All right. Don't let any of the staff touch that thing. Especially Emmerich.
Of course. That guy's crush on Sahelanthropus is beyond a joke. Guess he really wants to see his tech stand on its own two legs this time.
That's not gonna happen.
I know it. So you've got no plans to make it operational again?
Damn right.
Boss, I want to hear it straight from you.
Hear what?
What the hell do you want with that thing? The drive is busted. It's not like it has a nuke on board. Even if the metallic archaea could turn it into a nuclear weapon, all it can do is self-destruct. Sahelanthropus just isn't a weapon anymore. It'll draw unwanted attention without even being a deterrent.
I know.
The weapon's development strut sank 2 feet under that thing's weight. That's 1 year's drop in a single night. We've started on reinforcing the strut, but there's no guarantee it'll hold up if a storm hits.
I know that too.
Boss, why keep it?
It's a mark. Us Diamond Dogs, we don't have a country to call home. That means we have no past, nothing to prove that we lived. Every one of us threw it all away when we came here. Sahelanthropus is a symbol to show that the likes of us brought at least one crisis to its end.
A mark in history. So we can't just fade away.
It's of no practical use to us. But we still need it.
A symbol of what we've done. I'm glad I sounded you out on this. Snake, on behalf of all of us, I want to thank you.
I don't need gratitude. I need security. Keep Emmerich away from that thing.
Roger that.
You said that the nuke Skullface was trying to spread around the world were equipped with a failsafe. Something that could shut them down at will. His will.
Quite so. After all, he needed a guarantee that a buyer wouldn't simply turn the weapons back on him.
So how can they be stopped?
The criticality trigger, that is, the detonator, is a complete black box design. Any attempt to dismantle it causes it to melt in seconds, using the corroding archaea. The design ensures that no detonation is possible unless he disengages the lock.
So he had a way to disengage it remotely.
Precisely. The client simply presses a button. At that moment, the detonator begins transmission with a surveillance satellite. The satellite reports to him how the client is trying to use the nuke. If he does not object, the lock is disengaged.
But if it's a risk to him in any way...
The detonator melts down. The same is true if detonation does not occur within a preset time after the lock is disengaged. The nuke is rendered useless.
Who the hell would buy something with strings attached like that?
The client would never know until the moment they actually try to use it. Most likely, he would have explained the time delay as the detonators needing time to activate. And he only intended to sell to technologically primitive groups in the first place.
Let me guess. He'd claim it was defective and offer a replacement. Shadier than a used car salesman.
Skullface shakes your hand like a friend, using the other to control you like a puppet. This is how he works.
Code Talker. Haven't seen you eat a single thing since you got here. Let me guess. Photosynthesis?
Oh? What makes you say that?
Well, a long time ago, I knew someone with a similar ability.
Well, you are correct. Most of my body is covered with parasites. I supply them with water, and in return I receive sugars they produce when exposed to light. It isn't just my skin either. The parasites also act as my eyes. They have replaced many of my internal organs as well. It is thanks to them that I live on after over a century.
How did you obtain them anyway? Through your research?
I would like to say as much, but there is more to it than that. Let me take you back 20 years. I had hit a dead end with my parasite research. Then I was approached by a foundation. They said they had a sample of an unusual strain of parasite.
Which foundation?
Apparently, they had links to ARPA. But that is all I learned. I was somewhat ignorant of the ways of the world. Just being able to study it was enough for me.
Yeah, I've heard that before. Go on.
Half in doubt, I visited them to discover the body of an old man. Well, to be precise, his partial remains. A collection of parts, you could say. The man had died in an explosion.
An old man, you say?
His flesh had not decomposed. In fact, the tissue's cells were still metabolizing. The parasite had infected, or should I say assimilated with, the tissues, and was keeping them alive. I became obsessed with studying the body parts, foregoing food and even sleep. Every day was filled with new discoveries. The parasite's biology, internal anatomy, life cycle. But there was only so much I could learn through observation. And so I made a decision. To truly know the parasites, I had to live with them.
So, you implanted them inside you from the dead man's flesh?
Correct. It was quite a gamble, whether or not they would adapt to me. But fortunately, it appears I was compatible with them. Or perhaps, through my many years of research, my immune system learned to tolerate them.
Were they that body's only parasite?
Yes. However, there was a separate specimen that supplied its host with adrenaline in response to pain, and yet another that could control insects at will through secreting heterogeneous pheromones. I wanted exposure to them, to take them into me, but my wishes were denied. Their records, though, provided clues that helped advance my research. Would you care to join me? A life spent never worrying about food is a most wonderful one.
I think I'll pass. But thanks. This has been helpful.
Skullface has finally burned out. The world is rid of his existence at last.
Was he still alive?
You could say that. But you could also say he'd been dead for decades.
What's that supposed to mean?
Biologically speaking, it's hard to say how much was his life.
Side effects from the treatment?
No, the primary effect. Keeping a dying host alive as long as possible. That is the whole point. But in the end, he grew too dependent on his children. As if he had any other way to keep on living. He first underwent parasite therapy before the Soviet Union became his home. His body was horribly burned. Fire washed across his thin young frame and stole his skin and his throat, even his lungs. Only through repeated therapies could the parasites keep him alive. Most of his life became something the parasites gave to him.
And then he lost the ability to die.
That is correct. The parasites live on past the host's death, still aiding cell composition. At that stage, there is no way to extract them from the host cells. There is no way of knowing when the last cell of Skullface's body would die. The only choice was to burn the whole thing. And his children, along with it. And I am one to talk. When my life is snuffed out, I expect you to treat my body the same way. And when I burn, I will truly be one with my children for the first time. You say there were 3 English vocal parasites.
According to Skullface, yeah.
Skullface had 2 of the English strain with him. You burned both of them.
Approaching.
There was an oil fire. I tossed him in.
So that just leaves 1. And you tell me Skullface said he used it.
He said it was very close to me.
Very close. One of your comrades, or someone ordered to kill you. Or he could have been speaking metaphorically.
Metaphorically?
Close to your spirit, close to your heart. Someone who either loves you or despises you.
The second one makes a long list.
Whichever it is, act with caution. Skullface implanted someone with the English language strain. Who it is irrelevant.
Why?
I tell you what Skullface really meant. Very close to you means you will be exposed. All the infected here have been given the Wolbachia. Even if the vocal cord parasites infect them now, they cannot reproduce. But if there's a different host among us, host to the English strain.
If that were the case, we'd see the symptoms.
What about the non-English speakers?
We have plenty of those, but the staff use English as a common language.
But if that someone has not spoken English yet, and begins to speak it now,
there'd be another outbreak.
The final mating pair of the English strain must be found immediately. Skullface is gone, but his threat still remains. On this base, do you see what the final mating pair is? With him dead, those parasites are the stain he wished to leave upon the world. His thirst for vengeance. In the flesh. Think. Does anyone here bear a grudge against you? Who would target you, specifically?
The ethnic cleansers that Code Talker mentioned, they weren't Skullface's true goal.
All we have is circumstantial evidence, but here's my theory. It was Cypher who started developing the vocal cord parasites as bioweapons, parasitic weapons, and Africa was the testing ground for them. As Code Talker said, their purpose is the ethnic cleansing of only those who speak a particular language. So they could do a weapon of mass destruction to eradicate specific groups, races, ethnicities, or colonies by the language they speak. Or a kind of absolute language control. Or maybe a tool for those arrogant fools to build some misguided utopia. I can see plenty of uses for them. However, in practical terms, they wouldn't be as dangerous as you think. Counteracting the parasites is easy, after all. Cut them out of your throat to save your life, or just don't talk. That also prevents the infection from spreading. So if the international community were to find out about them, they'd no longer be the threat they were conceived to be. In which case, their targets would be limited to minority groups as a deterrent or a terrorist tool. It's hard to imagine Cypher developing something like that as a main weapon for their arsenal. That leads me to think we've only tugged on one little thread in Cypher's grand tapestry. An obscure corner of their work, possibly forgotten altogether. In any case, things changed. When Skullface was forced to relocate to Africa and he saw that thread dangling. All the time he continued that research, he was secretly following his own agenda. The ethnic liberator parasites. His English language strain. Skullface said there were only 3 samples of the English language strain parasite, and I think we can believe him. Bringing his ethnic liberator's plan to fruition depended on creating an English version of the vocal cord parasites at all costs. But an English strain would have been useless to Cypher. Worse, it could have destroyed everything they'd built. It was the one type they couldn't allow. That means Skullface was forced to develop his English strain out of sight of Cypher's network. Naturally, he couldn't use the greenhouse facility Cypher had set up and filled with guinea pigs. Skullface must have found some secret place to create his precious few English parasites, hiding all evidence like a man cheating on his wife. Somewhere, an entirely standalone environment. And when his plan entered its final phase, he must have made the place disappear. Some little room, could be anywhere, but now nowhere at all. We'll never know where he did it, but to elude Cypher's surveillance, it couldn't have been big. I believe Skullface was telling the truth. There were only ever 3 samples of the English language strain. Why activate Sahelanthropus in Afghanistan? This is how Skullface wanted things to play out. The Soviet Union secretly develops a new type of nuclear weapon and successfully deploys it in Afghanistan. Revealing the existence of Sahelanthropus results in a return to the glory days of the Cold War. The threat it poses reignites the nuclear arms race between the world's major powers. The demand for nuclear weapons increases around the globe. What if you then introduced a nuclear weapon anyone could get their hands on? Non-nuclear nations, militant groups of all shapes and sizes, they'd all jump at the chance. Sahelanthropus was a marketing tool to sell nukes all around the world. But I think it's safe to say that plan was stamped out before it got up and running. The world's intelligence agencies never did turn up anything conclusive on it. After all, Sahelanthropus vanished before word could spread. Everything that's happened is already a fading memory, never to join the pages of history. Except for Cypher. Cypher won't forget. They'll already be working on something, quietly, beneath the surface. They'll use the pieces of data scraped together from this incident to build their own bipedal weapon. It'll take them a long time to complete it, but for now, the greed sector have found their new life's work. We'll have to be ready too. This is yellow cake that Cypher was having the PF's transport. Before we met you, the boss recovered it from a truck crossing the savannah. Are there metallic archaea inside it?
Yes, the archaea metabolize uranium-235 to subsist. They must be stored inside yellow cake, or they cannot survive.
So those biological traces we took for impurities were actually the real cargo.
Of course, they are deactivated, so they do not trigger a sudden enrichment. They are like baker's yeast. Yet, they do gradually enrich the uranium as they feed. I imagine you detected weapons-grade traces.
Yeah, we did.
And the malachite that was loaded on the truck had traces of uranium in it too. So that's the flower, huh? Skullface was gonna sell do-it-yourself nuke kits. The uranium-enriching archaea complete with the user's manual. And the ores with the uranium could be sourced by the client or provided by Cypher.
Even the trace amounts buried in common ores can be enriched to weapons-grade uranium by the metallic archaea. Proving that must have been the most important factor of the trials. That and the ability to successfully prevent detonation.
So if the amounts of uranium in the ores are low enough, they can get past any inspection. And you only need a tiny amount of the archaea to act as the yeast. No great challenge to smuggle that either. The first step towards saturating the world with nukes.
His plan. That was not my intention. My only goal in developing the metallic archaea was to save the Dene.
What made you think a tool for creating undetectable nuclear weapons would save your people?
After 70 years, the Dene reclaimed the Navajo nation from which we were banished. We bore all the hardships of poverty, but we were proud to live off the land we called our own. But in the moment the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, everything changed.
I don't get it.
The nuclear arms race between the US and the Soviet Union began with the end of the Second World War. Suddenly, there was a massive demand for uranium, and it was our ill fortune that the ground beneath the Navajo Nation was rich with uranium ore. The Black Ana government set up mine after mine, and many of the Dene worked them, never informed of any danger. Every day, they went to work with no protection. The slag was simply piled out in the open. When rain fell, uranium traces left behind would seep out, and when the ground dried, it was blown about as dust. Land and water were contaminated, irradiated. Many of us became sick and died. That pain lives on to this day.
I had no idea.
Wanting more than anything to revive the land my forebears left to me, I was delighted upon discovering microbes that eat uranium. If they could be domesticated, I believed we could rid our land of uranium.
Were you successful?
No. The research called for funding on a colossal scale. But nobody was willing to invest with no prospect of a return.
And that's when Skullface showed up.
Correct. I can save you and your people. We share the same will. That is what he said to me. And I believed him. Black Ana forced me to abandon my uranium cleanup work and focus on nuclear weapons. And he held all the Dene hostage. Today, the uranium mines within the reservation are finally closing down. It is simply less expensive now to source uranium overseas.
New victims, different places.
But uranium is a tactical resource. To rely on a foreign country for it is a difficult decision to make. And he was in the perfect place to influence that decision.
He could have condemned your people to the mines forever.
The contamination comes not only from uranium. The fallout from the Nevada nuclear tests also settled on our lands. As if our fortune were not already bad enough, we are also downwinders. To save the Dene, I must complete my original research. The one that covers the parasite that lives on the surface of the skull's bodies is what gives them their power, similar to my children who live in my skin. I modified the parasites I isolated from the body of that old man, differentiating them with various abilities. One that can blend perfectly into its surroundings by exposing the pigments in its cells at will. Another that, by harboring multiple species of metallic archaea, can oxidize and reduce metal. Isolating the one that covers and transplanting it into an artificial medium should provide the same abilities as the skulls, but they can only subsist within a human body once transplanted into the medium. they will eventually die. Another thing, the weakness of the one that covers is desiccation. Their surface moisture loss is greater than ours. The reason they give off mist is to alleviate this by releasing the salts inside them as microparticles. Water vapor condenses around them, appearing as mist. But this dries out the atmosphere until they cannot even produce mist. And once their supply of water from the host runs out, the parasites are in danger. They, along with their host, enter a form of suspended animation. However, a similar effect occurs if they come into contact with a large amount of water. Rain, for instance. The one that covers will temporarily abandon other processes in his eagerness to absorb the water. Pitijolone. Make the weather your ally.
There's something I've been wondering. Why are you called Code Talker? During World War II, the U.S. military used the languages of different tribes, including the Navajo, as codes, right? I know the term Code Talker was used to mean people sent to the battlefield to speak in those codes. Were you one of them?
Our mother tongue was indeed used for war. But I did not go. I was already over the conscription age. However, I was made to help craft the codes that were spoken. So in a wider sense, you could call me a code talker for that. Navajo is a complex language, and virtually no one outside the U.S. speaks it. They must have thought it was the perfect language to use as a code.
Yeah, in the end, the Japanese never cracked it. The cipher is king in information warfare.
Of course, they didn't simply speak in Navajo. They created substitutions for words according to a code book, and then translated those into our language. Young Diné was sent to the front lines of the Pacific Theater as code talkers. To fight is an honor for the Diné. They were the pride of our people. But I cannot say this history brings me joy. Words are alive. When they are spoken, life is breathed into them. They become a part of the listener. Our words were transformed into lifeless ciphers and used for war. This, after the Black Ana spent generations suppressing the language.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I guess we shouldn't be calling you Code Talker, huh?
No, I do not mind. The reason Skullface called me Code Talker was because I also am responsible for coding language into the vocal cord parasites. I am the same as those young warriors, used for a cipher's sake. I must never forget that. The name, Code Talker, is a lesson carved into my being.
You said Skullface ordered you to weaponize the vocal cord parasites. But you also said he wasn't the reason.
And he wasn't. I was seduced by the parasites. That is a fact.
How? You mean from your curiosity as a scientist?
That I cannot deny. But there is more to it. The story goes back to the 19th century, to my earliest memory. One day, a man from the government visited our Hogan, our home. I cried as he yanked me from my mother's arms and took me away to an Indian boarding school. From that day forward, I became George. This was the name my teacher gave me. I was forced to give up my Diné name, forbidden from speaking anything but English. If we dared utter a word of filthy Navajo, the teacher made us eat a bar of soap.
Yeah, that was the U.S. government's education policy for Native Americans.
To erase our words was like erasing our people. Their education was tantamount to ethnic cleansing. Over time, the overt persecution of our language stopped. But to this day, it continues to be eaten away by the lingua franca, that is English. Many of the Diné outside the reservations can speak nothing else. And it isn't just our language. Across the world, minority languages are being destroyed by dominant languages. Many are on the verge of extinction.
Enter the vocal cord parasites.
Yes, I began thinking that minority languages needed some sort of deterrent against dominant languages. In order that their peoples and cultures would survive. It was then that I came across literature at the Foundation claiming that man acquired language thanks to a type of parasite, one that distinguishes between languages as a precursor to reproduction. If I could just resurrect it, make it more pathogenic, I would have my deterrent against English. But I failed to hide that aim from Skullface. He noticed. Yes, I wanted to retaliate against the English language, though never did I intend to actually use it as he planned. You know how the story ends. I was forced to study how to make the parasites compatible with all the world's languages. All but English.
However, he in fact secretly isolated an English strain.
I will not be held prisoner by the man's phantom. The English strain must not be allowed to exist either.
Hewitt's dug up some interesting facts about our skull-faced friend. 9 years ago, he was exiled to South Africa, stripped of political power. The upshot's that he ceased being a serious threat, in Cypher's eyes anyway. They eased up on surveillance, giving him an opening to establish his own military unit, one that answered to his will alone. Those men likely had no idea their orders were coming from Skullface. They probably didn't even know the organization was a part of Cypher at all. Anyway, it was in South Africa where he found renewed interest in parasites.
And when he discovered the vocal cord parasites,
He began to make his plan. Wipe the English language out of existence. Free the world, not by taking men's lives, but by taking their tongues. In his eyes, the greatest symbiotic parasite the world's ever known isn't microbial. It's linguistic. Words are what keeps civilization, our world, alive.
There was something Skullface said. America is made up of many peoples, but those peoples never mix. Quite so. One nation, home to hundreds of different ethnic groups, many of whom stick to their respective living areas, little colonies, not interacting with other groups, going out of their way to avoid one another, their land, organizations, relationships. Thus, the United States of America is no melting pot. It is more of a salad bowl. It is not made up from one people, but for its minorities to function in society, a common ground is needed. Language. Even if the country is not one. No, because it's not one, a lingua franca is necessary. English. American hegemonism was born from the illusion that English could unite diverse ethnicities. In taking in people from around the globe, America became a microcosm of it. Now the boundaries between it and the rest of the world have become blurred. However different our neighbors may be, English enables us to create symbiotic relationships with each other. If English can bring unacquainted neighbors together in America, this should hold true for the world. This salad bowl that is the world can also become one. A ruler's greatest wealth is not money or land. It is the number of individuals under his control. Subjects who work, consume, are there to be used as pawns in war. For a capitalist ruler, his people's power becomes his power. You are the same. With your diamond dogs, you spin it with your speeches. But what you're doing is bringing as much talent as you can into your little domain. Every person another feather in your cap. Yes. Since ancient times, every civilization's ruler has had the same idea. When people unite under one will, they become stronger than the sum of their parts. And the one will is the ruler's will. And what do rulers use to bring people together? Language. In the Old Testament, it is written that only one language was spoken in Eden. A shared tongue that united all of humanity. Mankind eventually grew aware of its power and harnessed that strength to build a tower to the heavens. The mighty Tower of Babel. This angered God, who splintered the language of man, and the tower was never completed. Languages emerged, and the earth was divided as men went their separate ways. Every age is the same. A ruler's first order of business, after conquering new land, is to force his tongue on its people. Ancient Rome, Napoleon, and now Zero. English is wreaking havoc around the world right now. The British Empire tilled the land with war as its hoe, then began planting the seed that is English. Eventually, American capitalism became the new instrument. To play its game of wealth, you only had to abide by one rule: English. By exploiting people's desires, English has become a leash that people gladly wear around their necks, it would seem.
So what were they doing at Nzoya Badia, Baloo? That facility with all the people laid out in rows?
The abandoned factory Shabani was held in.
It is precisely as you guessed. Black Anna was coding languages into the vocal cord parasites. They infected the subjects with the parasites, then made an incision in the throat to expose the vocal cords. That allowed them to play recordings of a desired language directly to the parasites.
And the parasites learned the languages that way. That's some teaching method. I just don't get how a bunch of bugs had the brain power for it.
They don't. Do not judge them by human standards. They do not learn as a function of intellect.
Then how do they do it?
What language the parasites react to is coded into their genes. You could expose the Japanese strain to English for years, and it would never learn the language and react to it. The pronunciation, rhythm, and structure are different. But what about, say, Spanish and Portuguese? Linguistically, the two are very close.
Yeah, they're both Ibero-Romance languages.
Even so, a Spanish language mating pair exposed to Portuguese will not copulate. Only when they hear Spanish. Only then. And the majority of their offspring will be the same.
So it's a literal case of a mother tongue.
But if that's so, I don't see how the different strains can be created in the first place.
Well, among the many thousands of offspring, there may be just a few that react to Portuguese.
You're talking about mutations.
Correct. Playing the tapes helps to identify the mutant strains. Those specimens are then isolated and bred with one another. From their children, specimens that react more strongly to Portuguese can again be selected and bred. Repeating this process creates a strain that reacts solely to Portuguese and never to Spanish. Mutation and selection. No different to breeding roses.
So you kept increasing the change over the generations, adapting them to languages from all over the world. Must have taken a hell of a lot of patience.
More like patience. Just how many died for this?
There's something I still don't get. In order to tell which larvae will react to Portuguese, you'd have to let them develop and then see which copulate. That means you'd need tens of thousands of guinea pigs. There's no way you could do that in a facility that small.
For normal selective breeding methods, you would be right. But there is a more effective selection method when training the vocal cord parasites.
Go on.
It is not only when mating that the parasites listen for language. Shortly before hatching, larvae display markedly increased activity in reaction to particular language. The active eggs can be identified under a black light, so the eggs that react to Portuguese are selectively placed in the throats of subjects. So you see, narrowing down strains that react to the target language is an effective process. Though I'm sure that even so, many lost their lives to create the various strains.
Taken against their will into that dungeon.
There are two reasons for playing the tapes for the parasites. One, to isolate the eggs that respond to the target language. And two, to cause the specimens raised from the selected eggs to mate.
I get how the system works. But why do they respond to language before they even hatch? It's not like they can mate from inside an egg.
It is because the larvae learn the language before hatching.
You mentioned that what language the parasites respond to is hard-coded into their genes, and that they don't have the brain power to actually learn a language. But then you say that the larvae at Nzoia Badia Bulu were learning the languages in the egg. Your story doesn't add up.
Your country is home to a unique songbird. The Japanese bush warbler.
Sure, what of it?
What a beautiful call it has.
Shortly.
But no bush warbler can sing it perfectly at the start. As chicks, they can barely chirp at all. They must learn from their parents and other adult birds. Only then can they sing properly and attract females. So naturally, there are individual differences in each bird's call. Though they start on the same footing, each bird is influenced by its teachers.
And the parasites are the same?
Like the birds, the parasites have a genetic predisposition towards a particular language. But while in the egg, the larvae's ears are tweaked by listening to the voice of the host. This tweaking ensures that the grown parasites will react better to the host's speech pattern.
Why would they have an ability like that?
Well, there are distinct regional differences within even the same language. Rare is the language that has no unique dialects. Yes, learning the host's speech pattern before hatching attunes the larvae to whatever twist of pronunciation it will encounter. This adaptive ability is what makes them so formidable.
I see. So a language requires selective breeding, but the parasites can learn dialects by themselves.
Of course, having the egg-stage larvae listen to the tapes in the factory was not meant to teach them. It was more important to use that trait of theirs to identify the mutated strains. As I mentioned earlier,
Is that really accurate enough to use as a weapon? You could wipe out a neighboring ethnic group by accident if their pronunciation is too close.
what you say is true. In that sense, they are imperfect as ethnic cleansers. But for his purposes, they are good enough. His objective was not to exterminate any one ethnic group, but to render the world's lingua franca, English, inert.
Yaat-e. You disappoint me. Have you forgotten my face?
Leave me be.
You won't respond to anyone else, so I figured it must be me you wanted to see. But now you won't even look at me.
Have I not suffered enough?
Not until you've eased my suffering first. To tell you the truth, old man, I'm in a bit of a bind. It's about your children. You know what I mean? The parasites. The ones that infect a man's throat, killing him if he speaks their language.
They must not be allowed to multiply.
You are allowed to live only in order to help me. But you don't want to, do you? So why not choose death instead? Because you want to protect the Diné and their land from me. That's your purpose, isn't it? Don't lose sight of that now. It's in your interest to cooperate. Because if you don't,
Madness.
the parasites can't detect your people's tongue. So I'll just have to resort to more heavy-handed means. I have the greatest respect for your people. I would rather avoid such a thing, but we don't always get our way. I was born a tiny mote in a mighty tempest, and until those winds abate, all I can choose is how to act when they blow me this way or that. Tell me, Code Talker, what happens to a man infected with a pair of your parasites? Can they be removed? Can the full-blown symptoms be prevented?
It is impossible to remove the parasites alone. They have too close an affinity with humans.
Then how do you stop the symptoms from developing? All right. I was hoping for an answer now, but perhaps you just need a little more time. I'll be back soon. I've set up shop, not far from here. We'll be seeing a lot more of each other.
If you're close by, then it is almost complete.
We're in the final phases. All that's left is to see if I can actually disable a nuke, with the help of your metallic archaea. Once that's done, I won't have to return here again, and your suffering will end, as will your people's. We're almost finished, Code Talker, each in our own way.
My only regret will be not finishing you.
There's nothing stopping you. I'm only alive because you want me that way.
Ridiculous.
As you wish. My regret is this misunderstanding between us. You and I, our goal is the same. We should be working together. A symbiosis.
You do not know my mind. I simply want the Diné bloodline to endure.
Really now? You're just another mote in the storm. How you react to all the slings and arrows, that's what counts. That's why you call those squirming monsters your children.
What I have done is forbidden. Forgive me, all of you.
The world should be left the way it is. You of all men should know that. Forgive me, but my schedule has changed. The time for grace and good manners has now run out.
Please. Torture will not work on me. Surely you know this.
Oh, I have no intention of getting rough with you. You haven't been beaten. Your hands aren't even tied. Just like me, you live in symbiosis with countless parasites. What wounds I might inflict, they'll patch right up. You might feel considerable pain, but I've no doubt you can withstand it.
Then what do you plan on doing?
I have a soldier standing outside. Nothing special about him, except that he always obeys. I have given him one instruction. Whenever I ring this bell, he passes on a message for me. That message is simply, go.
What is this?
After that, though, it gets complicated. The message will arrive at a room, a little bigger than this one, nothing special. Some of your people are in this room, surrounded by my men.
Enough of this.
They pick them at random. No regard for age, gender. In that, I suppose, they're different from you. Not as discriminating. They tied them up, one by one, blindfolded them. We had to maintain order, you understand?
You bastard.
Go. When they hear that, my men will pick one of your people and infect them with a parasite. Your parasite.
It won't work on my people.
True. The vocal cord parasite doesn't respond to your language. But what about English?
An English strain. It exists.
A ring of this bell, and they infect one person. If that person abandons the Navajo language, the English strain will trigger symptoms.
You monster.
So, it's quite simple. Every time I ring the bell, another of your people is infected.
Don't do this.
I don't want to do this. I'd rather not have to ring the bell, which is why I'm hoping you will talk to me.
What do you want? What else could you possibly want?
You know the answer to that. How to prevent the symptoms caused by the parasite.
You cannot control it like some slave. Forget the idea.
Forget it. Unlikely.
I will never tell you. What have you done?
You made me do that.
You black-hearted...
Settle down.
Don't use it again.
Well, that is up to you. All you need to do is tell me what I want. How to prevent the vocal cord parasite's symptoms.
Why? Why do you need to know?
The adult soldiers at Amasa are all dead.
What?
The parasite traveled downstream.
How?
It would appear that he was involved. Another demon who woke up from 9 years of slumber. As a result, the vocal cord parasite spread through the village.
I told you this would happen.
It was an unfortunate accident. He is becoming an annoyance. He may stumble upon the truth sooner or later, but I suppose that is really of no consequence. One day, he too will pay for what he has done.
Black Anna. The real demon is you.
You know, this incident made me realize something. You are right. I should have acted with more humility. These creatures cannot be controlled. All the more reason I require a means to stop them.
There is no such way.
Oh, really?
Wait! Don't ring it again.
It is up to you. Out with it!
I see now. There must be more to it than that.
What?
They are in you. You use this land to breed more of my children. And not just here. No. In pursuit of your ethnic cleansers. You sifted through many language strains. Finding hosts. Breeding more and more. You would have been infected in the process. Infected with countless strains. Most likely your mother tongues as well. Romania, Northern Transylvania. You found that one too. Yes, the Hungarian strain that responds to the CK's dialect.
Silence!
Black Anna. It is you who shall pay.
Is this your retaliation, old man?
Let my people go and never bother them again. You heard me. What now? What? No! What are you doing?
I am not afraid. I probably have every language strain inside of me. Meaning all the world's languages are already lost to me. But that suits me fine. If need be, I myself can produce whatever strain is needed.
And that means nothing to you. If you are infected, you can never again speak your mother tongue. Otherwise you will die. As will every one of your countrymen.
A few words here and there won't trigger the symptoms. And besides, the time is not yet right to show this face in my homeland. Not until my revenge is complete. Now...
Stop!
We're out of time. I have to get going. Well...
No! Radiation. It's radiation.
Radiation, of course. So it can be used.
But how much? I do not know.
Radiation denatures their reproductive cells, preventing them from mating.
Same principle as the sterilization technique. The reproductive cells are more sensitive to radiation than the rest of the body. But I have not tested it. There is no telling what mutation could result, or how the host may be affected. Not to mention what could happen if this is done post-infection.
I don't care. This plan goes into action now. As long as it works, the details can wait. You wouldn't be lying to me, of course, old man.
I can guarantee nothing.
I owe you my life. My body has been burned on countless occasions, but it survives, thanks to your children. That is why I trust you.
Then do not repeat my mistake.
What's that?
In the West, it is said that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. In the East, it is said the man of flesh brings spiritual power to words. The people knew back then that these creatures carry the gospel. They do not belong in our hands. They must not be touched.
How enlightening. I'll remember that. Consider this my thanks.
What are you?
Catch.
No!
Well then, I'm afraid it really is goodbye this time, Code Talker.
There is no soldier.
Huh. Now where did he run off to? Guess he wasn't as obedient as I thought.
There never was any soldier.
So long.
You! How dare you!